Since October 7th, 2023, the Gaza Strip has been at the center of a conflict on a scale that is, frankly, hard to comprehend. So in this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers of this crisis. We're going to look at the hard data, the complex geopolitics, and the intense battle for global perception, all based directly on information from humanitarian agencies and detailed reports. Let's start with the most sobering part, the human cost. To really grasp the scale of what's happening, you have to start with the human toll. According to Palestinian officials in Gaza, the number of reported fatalities has climbed past 68,000. That single number, it really sets the stage for the immense scope of the crisis we're about to break down.
And it's not just the human cost. The physical devastation is, well, it's just as staggering. A joint assessment by the World Bank, the UN, and the EU estimates that an incredible 78% of all buildings in Gaza have been damaged or completely destroyed. We're not just talking about a conflict anymore. This is the near total erasure of a physical landscape, and it raises these profound questions about what and how a society can ever possibly rebuild from ruins like these.
All right, so let's dig into our first layer, the raw data. These numbers paint a picture of the humanitarian emergency unfolding on the ground, and they are a direct reflection of the absolute collapse of the basic systems required for human survival.
Okay, so this table kind of brings all these different pieces of the crisis together. You see the fatality count from the Gaza Health Ministry. Right next to it, an estimated civilian fatality ratio from scholars and the UN, suggesting that a staggering 70 to 80% of those killed were civilians. The physical damage is valued at around $30 billion. And then you get to public health, and wow, a 36-fold increase in acute watery diarrhea. That's a direct result of sanitation just completely breaking down.
And this bar chart, it just starkly illustrates the sheer asymmetry of the conflict's human cost. On one side, you have reported Palestinian fatalities nearing 70,000. On the other, reported Israeli military fatalities stand at around 471. The visual contrast alone just drives home the disproportionate scale of the loss of life that's been documented in these reports.
So all of this devastation has led to what can only be described as a complete collapse of basic needs. UNICEF reports that only 40% of water facilities are even working, creating what they call a man-made drought. The World Food Program is warning that Gaza is right on the brink of famine. You've got over 1.3 million people crammed into UN shelters, and by the end of 2023, only 15 out of 36 hospitals were even partially functional. The implication here is just inescapable. The fundamental systems for life are failing, and that's leading to surging cases of diseases like hepatitis A and dysentery. And behind every single one of those statistics, there are individual human beings. This quote from a health worker right there in Gaza, it cuts through all the numbers. It's such a powerful reminder of the desperate choices people are facing when the absolute basics for survival are just stripped away. Now, this incredibly dire situation has led human rights groups to start using a very specific legal term, the use of starvation as a method of warfare. So what does that mean? Well, it's defined as the intentional deprivation of objects that are absolutely indispensable to the survival of a civilian population. And if you're wondering why that specific term is being used, well, this quote is a big part of the reason. It's from Israel's Minister of Defense on October 9, 2023, and it's cited by groups like Human Rights Watch as direct evidence of an intent to deprive Gaza's population of these essential resources. Right. So this whole humanitarian situation, these legal questions, none of this happened in a vacuum, right? They are the direct consequences of political decisions and military strategies. So let's peel back that next layer, the really complex geopolitical battlefield, which is just this web of stated goals, competing interests, and incredibly high-stakes diplomacy.
So, looking at Israel's stated position, the justification for its military campaign is self-defense, a direct response to the October 7th attack that killed 1,200 Israelis. The declared objective? The complete destruction of Hamas' military and its governmental capabilities. And on the diplomatic front, Israel has consistently insisted on having security guarantees before it will agree to any kind of permanent ceasefire.
Now, on the other side, Hamas frames its actions as retaliation for what it calls the long-term siege and occupation of Gaza. Its main stated goal has been an immediate ceasefire and a complete end to the blockade. And during negotiations, sources are reporting that Hamas has, on several occasions, accepted mediation proposals for a truce and an exchange of hostages and prisoners. And then you have the international mediators, and their roles are, to put it mildly, incredibly complex. The United States has been Israel's main ally, providing military aid
while at the same time co-negotiating truces and pushing for more humanitarian access. You've got Qatar, which has been a primary go-between because it hosts Hamas's leadership, and then there's Egypt, controlling the critical Rafah border crossing and co-hosting many of the ceasefire talks.
And if you want to see just how challenging that mediation has been, this timeline really tells the story. You can see it's this constant stop-and-start process. A U.S.-drafted resolution gets vetoed back in October 2023. There's a temporary pause in November. Then a detailed truce plan is accepted by Hamas, but is deemed unacceptable by Israel in May 2024. It really highlights just how deep the divisions between the main parties are. Okay, so this brings us to our final, and maybe one of the most confusing layers of this whole thing, the war for narrative. Because this fight isn't just on the ground. It's being fought with words, with images, and with social media algorithms, in a fierce battle to shape how the entire world sees this conflict.
The very language we use to talk about this is a key battleground. Just look at the framing here. Actions by Israel are often presented as self-defense, while actions by Palestinian groups are called retaliation. The October 7th attacks are widely called a massacre, but large-scale Israeli military operations are often referred to as a raid or a bombardment. It even extends to the people. Are they hostages or detainees? Are they troops or militants? These aren't just words, they're choices that fundamentally shape how we perceive who's legitimate and who's the victim.
And this isn't just something academics talk about. This debate is raging inside the newsrooms of major organizations. This anonymous quote actually comes from a group of BBC journalists who felt that their own network was failing to humanize Palestinian victims, effectively reducing them to numbers while giving more detailed attention to Israeli victims.
And of course, the information war is absolutely raging on social media. One research firm found that in just the first month of the conflict, get this, pro-Palestinian hashtags generated over 100 billion views on platforms like TikTok. That just dwarfed the reach of pro-Israel content, and it shows you the incredible power of user-generated content in shaping the global conversation.
So what does this all mean? It means we are deep in what experts call an information fog of war. You've got widespread disinformation everywhere, fake videos, AI-generated images, old footage presented as new. One analysis even found this pattern of dehumanization, where Israeli victims are often individualized in media reports while Palestinians are represented as a collective. The result is this incredibly polarized media landscape that makes it really difficult for anyone to discern the objective facts.
Okay, so after all of this, the numbers, the politics, the narratives, what on earth comes next? The sources we've been looking at really lay out two very different ideas for the future of Gaza. One is focused on international governance, and the other is focused on legal accountability.
All right, so one path forward is all about international governance, and it was reportedly outlined in a U.S. draft for the UN. The idea is to create an international stabilization force, but this is more than just peacekeeping. It's a whole multi-stage plan. It would start with a board of peace to oversee a transition. Then it would deploy an international force with a UN mandate to completely demilitarize Gaza, and crucially, civil administration would be handed over to a technocratic Palestinian committee with the goal of rebuilding institutions from the ground up until at least 2027. The thinking here is that external oversight is needed to break the cycle. But there's a completely different approach, one championed in human rights analysis. This one bypasses all that transitional governance stuff and focuses squarely on legal accountability. The argument here is simple. You can't have peace without justice for alleged violations of international law. The demands are really clear. A UN arms embargo on Israel, targeted sanctions on officials implicated in grave breaches of the laws of war, and a full investigation into potential war crimes, including the use of starvation. And central to this whole approach is the immediate and unconditional lifting of the Gaza blockade, which proponents say is a root cause of the crisis, not just a symptom.
And so, all of this leaves us with one final, incredibly critical question. When the data shows a complete catastrophe, when diplomacy is stuck in a gridlock, and when the stories being told are in total opposition to each other, what does it actually take to move beyond the cycle of violence and build a foundation for a just and lasting peace? It's a massive question, and it's not just facing the region, it's a challenge for the entire international community.